And I am going to thank everyone for joining us this evening. It's a great turnout as we expected. It's wonderful to see faces from apparently all over the country, as we just established. So thank you again for being a part of this speaker series where we really hope to bring our community together from near and far. So Gary can give a little introduction to himself, though I suspect many of you know a bit about him. But Gary, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to hearing your presentation this evening.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, so thanks, Leah, for inviting me on behalf of the Ray Center. I'm really happy to be here speaking with you all this evening. I also want to recognize my parents, Jean and Ed Moak, who were able to attend through the magic of Zoom from New Jersey, and my sister-in-law, Fran, from Minnesota. The pressure's on, and I just want to let you know that if I don't live up to expectations, I'm going to blame it on the COVID vaccine I received earlier this morning. Bear with me while I'm gonna actually, Leah asked me to tell you a little bit about who I am. So for those of you who may not know, I'm a geriatric psychiatrist. I've been in practice for about 35 years, currently work at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, where I direct the geriatric psychiatry training fellowship, training the next generation of people to pick up the baton and carry on as we all get older. The reason I think this is important is I've spent a lot of time thinking about mental health problems as they affect older adults, but geriatric psychiatry is also evolving as a lifespan specialty. And increasingly we think about what people can do starting in childhood and adolescence, but throughout adulthood, and even as they get older and approach old age or age during the senior years, to maintain good brain health and prevent some of the common problems, the mental health problems that affect people when they get older. And that's what I want to talk with you about this evening. It's a vast area and I can't begin to scratch the surface of it. I could talk about this all night, but I'm going to try to hold my remarks to about 45 minutes or so. I'll see how that goes, leaving time for some questions and answers, and I'll be happy to take questions about my discussion tonight or any other topics in the area of mental health and aging you'd like to hear about. Bear with me for a minute. Oh, you disabled my screen sharing. There we go. All right. So before we start talking about brain health and things that we can all do to try to improve brain health and fitness throughout life, no matter how old we get, we need to debunk a few falsehoods about mental health and aging that unfortunately are still widely believed by older adults, members of their families, and even many healthcare professionals in our healthcare system. And those essentially have to do with the belief that mental health problems and mental decline heading into senility is just a normal, expectable part of aging. It's just par for the course, what happens to you when you get old. People don't differentiate different kind of mental health problems. They tend to assume it's all one form of senility or another. And since people commonly believe that nothing can be done about senility to treat it or prevent it, they also often believe that nothing can or should be done about any kind of mental health problems in old age, and there's really nothing you can do to maintain good brain fitness in aging. Now, none of these things are remotely true. They're all false, and I want you to just throw them out the window if you've had any thoughts related to anything like this. Now, perhaps most disturbing is the idea that depression is an understandable and expectable part of old age, just what happens to you when you get old, and it's par for the course. Because in our youth-oriented society, people believe, of course, that being old is depressing, that old age is depressing. And in fact, we know that nothing is further from the truth. This graph shows you levels of happiness, well-being, and life satisfaction across the lifespan. And what you can see is that these levels hit their low point at around midlife. So those of you that are watching that are somewhere in the vicinity of 45 to 55 and feeling miserable about things these days, there's reason to be optimistic. It's going to get better as you get older. Now, as you can see in this graph, that for both men and women, levels of well-being and happiness increase with aging, and they don't plateau out. So we know that if we look at different cohorts in our society, the cohort of people that are currently old enjoy the highest levels of happiness and life satisfaction compared to any other group of adults. And they probably give children and adolescents a run for their money, and probably are doing better than they are too. So the idea that depression is an inevitable part of aging is just not true. It needs to be dispelled. Now, unfortunately, we all know that as we get older, many of our abilities begin to slip a little bit, and that slippage becomes noticeable in midlife. Certainly by the mid 40s or 50s, people notice that many of their abilities are beginning to drop off: physical abilities, mental abilities, physiologic abilities. And this is true for mental abilities as well. So we see that over the course of the lifespan, there's a slow, steady drop off in a range of cognitive abilities. But on the other hand, there are a few that actually get better as we age. And in some ways, we get smarter and wiser. And this may be the basis of the high levels of wisdom that tend to be highest among older adults. So what we're going to be talking about are things we can do to slow, prevent, or mitigate this drop off, and at the same time support or maybe reinforce these areas where things get better with time. Now, one way to understand this is that variability in any descriptive variable having to do with human well-being or health or physiology increases with aging. So to illustrate the point, if we look at newborns, if we take 100 newborn babies and look at them, they're going to comprise a very homogeneous population of people. They're all going to look pretty much the same, notwithstanding the fact that each one of their parents thinks they have the most beautiful child on the planet. Those babies are all pretty much alike in any variable you can measure. But as time goes on through the lifespan, variability increases. And on average, as we age, things head south a bit. Still, for most of us, within the normal functional range, but we're losing capacity as we age. However, you can see that some of us are still holding our own, doing pretty well, and have not dropped off significantly. And even in our experience here in Waterville, we see this. We have friends and neighbors in their 80s who still downhill ski, who still play tennis, who still cycle and hike, and still work in intellectually demanding professional roles, and haven't lost all that much. And maybe, as I said earlier, in terms of wisdom and decision making, they've actually picked up a few steps. And on the other hand, we all know people that have not done well with aging, who have begun to be limited by various illnesses, disabilities. Many have developed, and in the cognitive realm, many have slipped into the range of dementia, Alzheimer's disease and related disorders, maybe have wound up in nursing homes, or by this stage in life, some have already died. So variability is greatest. And what we're going to really be talking about is what you can do to try to move into this upper end of the range and stay out of the lower end of the range. So we're going to talk about aging and the brain. We're going to talk a little bit about the science that informs some of the lifestyle practices that I'm going to talk about tonight that each one of us can adopt in order to try to optimize brain fitness as we get older. Now, this fresco depicts Ponce de Leon in his quest to find the fountain of youth. And the bad news is he didn't find it, and we still haven't found it either. There's no magic pill or silver bullet that you can take away from tonight's talk. That's the bad news. But the good news is there are many things that you can do that make a difference. This bar graph depicts 5 major contributors to outcome in later life. 5 major categories of variables that determine how we're doing physically and mentally as we get older. And as you can see, environment, healthcare, and social circumstances are important, but not nearly as important as genetics and behavioral or lifestyle factors. And while we can't do much about genetics, we can't change that, at least not yet, there's a lot that we can do about behavioral and lifestyle factors. Those, after all, are under our control. So that's really the good news part of my talk tonight. Now, in support of this, a whole specialty known as lifestyle medicine has grown up, and it has basically 8 pillars to it, which are listed here in this table. Now, I don't have time to talk about all of them tonight, and I'm assuming that most people here have a good sense about tobacco use, alcohol, and use of other substances, managing your weight, and the value of keeping your weight within a normal BMI, particularly in middle age and later, dealing with sleep and getting healthy sleep, and dealing with emotional well-being, area that I spend most of my professional work thinking about, but it's just too big a topic to bite off tonight. So I'm going to be focusing on nutrition, exercise, and stress management, 3 huge pillars of lifestyle medicine that can have a huge impact on brain health as we age. Now, to give you an example, we currently believe that if we could control high blood pressure, diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, limit smoking or eliminate smoking, limit alcohol to low or moderate consumption throughout life, and encourage people to exercise and eat in a more healthy way, we could actually prevent 50% of cases of Alzheimer's disease. 50%. Now, are we really preventing them? Not really. We're staving it off or forestalling it to a point where it no longer matters. Now, let me show you what I mean with this slide. So this slide depicts a trajectory of decline in some medical variable throughout life. This one particularly deals with cognitive functioning. And the black curve follows the natural course of somebody who's headed into Alzheimer's disease. And when they cross this dotted line, they clinically have diagnosable Alzheimer's disease. Somebody like me could come along and say pretty definitively, yeah, you've got it. So let's assume this occurs maybe at around the age of 75 or 80 or even 85. And what you can see is by adopting a number of lifestyle and behavioral changes earlier in life, maybe going back to maybe 50, 60, 70, or even 80, you can do what's called rectangularizing the lifespan curve, which basically is a fancy way of saying that you kind of push out this level of decline way out ahead into your lifespan. And so if this is maybe 80 and this is maybe 90, 95, or 100, and you're destined to die somewhere in here, rather than dying with having lived already 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years with Alzheimer's disease, you've actually died well before Alzheimer's symptoms have become clinically significant for you, and well before they've had an impact on your lifestyle or had an effect on your family. Now, the take-home message here is that starting earlier is better, but it's never too late. So even if you start at the age of 75, 80, or even 85, adopting these strategies accrues benefits. Now, the benefits are not as robust, but you can see that by starting late, you can stave off these problems. In this case, we're talking about Alzheimer's and related disorders, 2, 3, maybe even 4 years, which can be highly significant for many people. So let's focus on the brain for a second. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to, we're going to slice the brain up like a loaf of bread. And then we're going to turn one of the slices out so we can look at it face on. And this is what we're going to see. This is a section of a nice, healthy brain. We should all have brains that look this good. And although the whole thing is different shades of pink, I think you can appreciate the distinction between the gray matter of the brain and the white matter of the brain. Now, the gray matter, this darker stuff, represents the areas where different brain centers are located, where the brain cell bodies are actually located and interact with each other to do the mental processes that make up our inner conscious lives, the sensing, the perceiving, the feeling, the emoting, the thinking, the speaking, the reasoning, and the decision making. And the white matter represents the fiber tracks between these areas that allow them to communicate with each other, create the richness of our mental and emotional lives. Now, so in this slide, what I've done is contrasted a pretty healthy older brain with the brain of somebody with Alzheimer's disease. And you can just see the devastation that occurs as this brain slowly dies and shrinks and shrivels up. Now, I want to point out the damage is actually worst and earliest in an area of the brain called the hippocampus. Now, I mentioned that it's a term I'd like you to try to remember because I'm going to use it again later. It's a critical term in terms of some of the strategies we're going to be talking about. You could see in the healthy brain, it's nice and luscious and plump. And in the Alzheimer brain, it's all ugly and shriveled up. And this is the outcome. We want to prevent this from gradually becoming this, and the rest of the brain from gradually losing traction as we go. Now, on this slide, what I've done is turned the brain sideways again. And on the right side, I'm giving you a picture, cutting the brain down the middle and showing you a picture of an MRI scan. And you can see here, this is not gray and white matter. It's simply the way the MRI scan works. But you could see a normal brain with nice plump brain tissue, back of the head's here, front of the head's here, eyes and nasal passages here, brainstem leading down into the spinal cord and neck are here. And next to it, the picture in contrast that I want to show you is a picture through a really cool cutting edge technology called DTI, diffuser tensor imaging, which allows us to get pictures of the white matter fiber tracks. And what this picture shows us is just the richness of these fiber tracks, which they're not colorized like this. Scientists who produce this image have taken the liberty of colorizing different tracks within the different circuits and brain networks, so we can identify the different areas of the brain, each of which functions like a section of a symphony orchestra, performing in a well-conducted orchestrated way to produce the beautiful music that is all our mental experience. And I just want you to keep this image, this elaborate, intricate, beautiful array of nerve fiber connections and the circuits and networks that they create to allow us to have the rich mental lives we have. Because the name of the game and what we're going to be talking about is things that we can do to protect and preserve our gray matter, but even more importantly, things we can do to maintain the robustness of these white matter tracks and the richness of their connections. Now, this is an image of a scanning electron microscope that drills down even further on some of these fiber tracks. And there are 4 independent nerve cells here, nerve cell fibers. And again, they've been colorized for our benefit so we can appreciate the different fibers separate from each other. And what I'd like you to appreciate is the rich branching along these fibers. They're not just simple wires. They are wires with this elaborate pattern of branching. And each of the branches ends with a little bulbous area called a nerve cell bouton. These branches are called dendritic spines, and they end in these boutons. And these dendritic spines and boutons are where brain cells establish connections with each other in what are called synapses. And it's at the synapses that the electrochemical informational signals are transferred from one brain cell to another. Now, why is this important? Well, each of us has about 100 billion brain cells. That's a lot of brain cells. You'd think some people don't have as many, but actually we all have pretty much 100 billion. But what's really impressive is those 100 billion brain cells form trillions and trillions of connections. These synaptic connections, that's trillions. And what's even more impressive is that among these trillions of connections, these connections turn over at a rate of about 100 billion a minute. So while you're all sitting here listening to me, inside each of your brains, these processes are turning over actively. Some are being broken down because they're no longer needed. Others are being formed as you need new ones. And what's critical to understand is good mental health and good brain fitness depends on 2 things. It depends on more than that, but 2 critical things that can be impacted by lifestyle and behavioral factors. It depends on the robustness of this process of connectivity turnover, and the sprouting of new brain cells in that area called the hippocampus that I pointed out to you earlier. It's the only place in our brains where we actually get new brain cells throughout the lifespan, no matter how old we get. That's a new area of science. We used to believe that the number of brain cells you were born with was all you got, but that's no longer believed to be true. And this process of sprouting new brain cells and forming new brain cell connections together is referred to as neuroplasticity. And so we're going to be talking about how you can improve neuroplasticity in your brains no matter how old you get. Now you can imagine this is a critical process because it's tiring to me just telling you about it. It's an exhausting process that consumes a lot of energy. So while the brain makes up only 2% of our entire body weight, it consumes 20% of our energy production. The brain is very needy and demanding. And what we need to do is look at ways that we can make sure that our brains get the energy they need to do the job, that this neuroplasticity is supported. And so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the three main ways we accomplish that. And it comes down to good heart health, managing inflammation and oxidative damage in the brain throughout the body, but especially in the brain, and then supporting and promoting neuroplasticity. So heart health, there's a rule of thumb that's important to go by, which is that what's good for the heart is good for the brain. Now, why should that be? Well, I put this image back of this rich fiber connectivity that you see in the brain. And on the right here is this ratty looking ugly thing is actually the arterial blood supply of a healthy brain. And you can see it becomes sort of obvious that in order to supply that 20% energy demands that our brains require, we need to maintain robust circulation to the brain. And the best way to do that is whatever preserves best cardiovascular health is the most optimal way to make sure that brain circulation remains robust. When cardiovascular health begins to fail, brain circulation begins to fail along with the other organs, but the brain is much more sensitive because it has so much greater energy demands. And as brain circulation begins to fail, our cells begin to fail and the connections begin to fail, and we begin to feel those effects in terms of our mental lives. So cardiovascular health is the first thing we need to do in order to preserve brain function, and that's about circulation. But now we're going to talk to what we can do directly to promote good brain substance health. We're going to look at the substance of the brain itself, not just the circulation coming from the heart. We're going to talk about exercise, diet, and stress management. Now, this is a story of American exceptionalism, because these are three areas which most Americans, present company accepted, are not exceptionally good. We'll start with exercise. The caption on this cartoon says, "My doctor told me to increase my exercise program, so I switched from not exercising 3 times a week to not exercising 6 times a week." All right, it's just the opposite of what we need to do. There is an enormous body of scientific evidence demonstrating the brain health benefits of exercise. I've listed a few of them here. I won't go into them in detail, but exercise is just good for the brain. It just does a trove of wonderful things for the brain. But most interestingly enough, for our conversation tonight, exercise is a robust stimulator of the growth factor Bdnf, which promotes neuroplasticity. Now, so if we back up for a second and look at exercise and brain health, it does 3 things. Again, exercise promotes heart health, and that's good for brain circulation. Exercise has been shown to reduce inflammation and oxidative damage throughout the body, but especially in the brain, through a physiologic process called hormesis, which promotes not only brain cell health, but promotes neuroplasticity. And exercise releases Bdnf, which stimulates neuroplasticity. Now, without wading into the neurochemical weeds of Bdnf, the best way to think about it is that Bdnf is basically fertilizer for your brain. It's the closest thing we have to the fountain of youth. And you're going to hear more about this in the lay press in the coming years. BDNF, as I said earlier, is critical to promoting sprouting of new brain cells in the hippocampus and the constant robust turnover of these billions and billions of brain cell connections that are turning over every minute. The more BDNF you have, the healthier your brain. The less BDNF you have, the less healthy your brain is. So anything that can promote BDNF is good for the brain. Now, exercise does that. Now, you might ask, what's the connection? Why should exercise promote BDNF release in the brain? Well, some interesting science recently suggests that the answer is to be found in evolution, related to our emergence as bipedal organisms, bipedal animals, who, by virtue of becoming bipedal, were able to adopt a communal hunter-gathering lifestyle. That the bipedalism and hunter-gathering may be the missing link between exercise and the brain. Now, if you think about it, hunter-gathering, particularly hunting in a tribal format, coordinating with a group of people to bring down big game, is really a task that involves the ultimate level of brain multitasking. It's brain multitasking on steroids. It involves so many different activities, engaging all of those brain areas and brain networks, all in concert, all in a dynamic way, a rapidly changing way, in a high stress way, and doing it maybe while carrying objects in your hands, maybe having to throw those objects if they're weapons, and doing it all while you're balancing on 2 feet. You think about it, animals that walk on 4 feet don't have that challenge of having to balance. Balancing on 2 feet imposes an extra level of demand on the brain. And people are beginning to speculate that what natural selection has done has selected for people whose brains were able, in response to performing these tasks, to strengthen them, to strengthen the brain circuits that subserve these activities. Think about that like exercising a muscle to build muscle capacity. This is exercising your brain to build brain capacity, and BDNF is the way we do that. It may be why 2 activities, Tai Chi and dancing, have been shown to be especially good for brain health. Possibly because, like hunter-gathering activities, they involve carefully coordinated, choreographed activities that are dynamic and evolving through time, possibly involving response to rhythm, all while balancing on 2 feet, and especially in the case of dancing, while coordinating it with another person. Now, I don't have time to go into specific recommendations about what type of exercise regimen you should adopt or what's best for you. A couple of rules of thumb. First, whatever you decide to do, it's important, assuming that you're going to increase your exercise regimen, not by reducing the amount of times you don't exercise to 6 times a week, but you're actually going to increase your exercise. Make sure whatever you do, that medically it's safe for you to do that. Get consultation with a healthcare provider or another specialist in exercise physiology or a rehab specialty to make sure what you're doing is medically, physiologically and mechanically safe. The US Department of Health has put out recommendations. They're probably not aggressive enough, but I want to point out that something is better than nothing. There are good data that show that even walking 20 minutes 3 times a week produces measurable benefits in brain health. But again, more is better. A combination of aerobic activity, strength building activity, and balance and flexibility activities are best. From a point of view of brain health, we're going to focus on balance and flexibility practices and aerobic practices. And the only point I want to make here is that for years, our most research looking at brain health and aerobic fitness has focused on endurance training. But a more recent cutting edge development has shown that in addition to endurance training, you need high intensity interval training too, that this type of activity is most robust in releasing or stimulating BDNF release. So you want to combine endurance aerobic training with periods of high intensity interval training for the best results. And again, make sure whatever you do that it's medically safe. Okay, let's turn to diet now. Here we have a customer ordering at a fast food restaurant, and he says, I'd like some dry broiled fish, sliced cucumbers, and fresh mixed berries. If you don't have that, I'll take a triple bacon cheeseburger, jumbo fries, and a cookie dough shake. Again, not an area where we Americans are especially known for being high achievers. But the good news there is there's room for us to improve. Now, the story of diet or nutrition and brain health has to do with not only what you eat, but how much you eat. In the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about how much you should eat, other than to say that we Americans are all pretty much overfed. And calories are bad with respect to inflammation throughout the body and in the brain and oxidative load. So we could all benefit from eating a little bit less, reducing the metabolic burden we put on our bodies and our brains. But more importantly, what we eat has a huge impact. So let's look at that. And what we eat really comes down to, with a few additions, adopting a more Mediterranean style diet. So many of you may know what that is, but in the interest of ensuring that we go through it real quickly, that's what I'm going to do. So the Mediterranean diet is based on consuming carbs in the form of whole grains, hopefully as minimally processed as possible, lots of legumes, lots of fresh vegetables, fresh fruit consumed mostly for dessert. But if you consume sweet desserts, try to limit them to things made with olive oil, nuts, and honey, or other sweets mostly reserved for special occasions. It's a tough one. Principal source of dietary fats should include virgin olive oil, nuts, and seeds. Dairy should be limited mostly to yogurt and cheese, with limited small amounts of milk, mostly only in coffee. Fish in moderate amounts, poultry in low to moderate amounts, and red meat and eggs in minimal amounts, and wine in low to moderate amounts, mostly with meals. Now, what's good about the Mediterranean diet? Well, a whole slew of things, but I've listed a few of them here. The Mediterranean diet is nearly as good as taking a statin in terms of improving your lipid profile. Because it's rich in omega-3 fatty acids and polyphenols, two dietary ingredients that are extremely antioxidative and anti-inflammatory in nature, the Mediterranean diet reduces inflammatory damage and oxidative stress in our bodies and in the brain. And it has other benefits as well that I'm gonna skip by in the interest of time this evening. The other thing about diet that's important is that low-fat diets are all the rage, but low-fat diets are actually not all that healthy, particularly if you replace the fat calories with carbohydrates. In fact, if you do that, you're actually putting your cardiovascular health at risk and indirectly your brain health as well. You need fat in your diet, but the key is you need the right kind of fat. So obviously we want to avoid trans fats, but we want to include foods that are very rich in omega-3 fatty acids, mostly nuts, seeds, and small fish. And you want to try to reduce dairy and things like butter with margarines based on plant oils that are rich in alpha-linoleic acid. You can buy products on the market which will tell you they're a good source of alpha-linoleic acid, another omega-3 fatty acid that's especially healthy, health promoting in so many ways. And of course, virgin olive oil is a great source of fat in the diet. Now, we're going to go through a few superfoods real quickly that I want to touch on in addition to what we've covered already. One is, I'm going to stick with virgin olive oil because it really is head and shoulders a superfood. Let's talk about why that is just for a minute. The thing about virgin olive oil is it's a real treasure trove of polyphenols. There are at least 36 in all that have been identified, and there probably are more. But one in particular, oleocanthal, is an interesting substance. Now, oleocanthal is what makes virgin olive oil burn the back of your throat when you eat too much of it too quickly. Oleocanthal is a potent polyphenol that's interesting because milligram for milligram, it's as potent as ibuprofen as an anti-inflammatory agent. So consuming virgin olive oil, an extra virgin olive oil, rich in oleocanthal, may be equivalent through the lifespan of taking a half or a quarter of a baby aspirin every day or every other day for decades at a time. It just reduces inflammation and the associated oxidative damage throughout our bodies, but in particular in our brains. Now, coffee, just a note, I mean, one of the things about following nutritional science is it changes every week, right? This week it's good for you, last week it'll kill you, next week it'll be good for you again. But the evidence is accruing that coffee is actually good for you. And there's some studies that show that coffee drinkers actually live longer than people who don't drink coffee. Coffee is rich in polyphenols and caffeine. And caffeine's interesting. Caffeine isn't just a benefit because of the stimulant properties that make us more awake and sharper. Caffeine may have direct benefits in the brain. And in fact, caffeine may promote release of Bdnf as well, which may be a benefit that hasn't been appreciated until recently. The jury is out on this, but data are starting to suggest that it may be the case. Dark chocolate's another one. Dark chocolate is loaded with flavonoids, a family of polyphenols, and caffeine for that matter, but it contains two other substances that may be of value. Maybe it may explain why we all love chocolate so much. Chocolate contains N-acetylethanolamine, which is a cannabinoid, natural cannabinoid. So you're basically getting a puff off a joint whenever you have a lot of dark chocolate. And it contains PEA, which has cocaine-like activities. So when we eat chocolate, we're getting a shot of caffeine, we're getting a shot of THC or THC-like substance, and we're getting a shot of a cocaine-like substance, which is probably why we all thought it was a taste, but it's the chemical benefit that probably does it. Now, nuts are emerging as the new kid on the block as superfoods go. There's increasing evidence that nuts are good for you, and some recent evidence, that people that eat nuts regularly as a habit throughout most of their lives have lower death rates than people who don't eat nuts at all. Now, all nuts are good for you. They're all rich in polyphenols, but walnuts are beginning to stand out as a superfood head and shoulders above all other nuts. And that, in particular, that's because in addition to being loaded with polyphenols, they're also an excellent source of alpha linoleic acid, an omega-3 fatty acid I already mentioned, and melatonin, the sleep hormone, which I'm going to say more about in a couple minutes. Green tea is also really good for you and promotes brain health. An ingredient in green tea, a polyphenol called ECGC, don't ask me to tell you what that stands for, has anti-dementia properties. There's a really nice, elegant study done in Japan looking at elderly Japanese that showed that rates of green tea consumption correlated inversely with incidence of dementia. The more green tea older Japanese drink, the less likely they are to develop Alzheimer's disease and related disorders. So green tea consumption may actually have preventive benefits. And there's the red wine story. I really don't want to wade into the whole issue of alcohol consumption and what's a safe level of alcohol consumption or not. And I don't want to suggest that if you hate red wine, you need to go out and drink red wine. Certainly don't go out and load up on this. We don't want you to rot your liver trying to save your brain. But if you like red wine and you're at dinner and you're trying to decide, should I order white or should I order red? Go for the red. Wines all contain polyphenols, but the interesting thing about the red wine story is that it contains a compound called resveratrol, which has been shown to have anti-aging properties in a wide range of species. Now, how much you need to drink to consume enough resveratrol to have the effect is not clear, but in societies where red wine drinking is part of the lifestyle and it's consumed throughout life, rates of dementia actually tend to be a little lower. And finally, spices. Spices are all loaded with antioxidant, anti-inflammatory polyphenols, and I'll mention that among them, ginger and cinnamon have the most robust benefits. Now, I don't have time to go through the whole area of nutritional supplements, but I do want to come back and talk with you about melatonin for just a second. Most of us appreciate melatonin as a sleep hormone and recognize it as an over-the-counter sleep aid. And by the way, it's very safe to use it for that purpose. We recommend melatonin in our geriatric clinic at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center as a first line treatment for most of our patients that are complaining of sleep problems. Now, with aging, melatonin levels in the brain normally drop, and it may be one of the reasons why it becomes harder to sleep well as we get older. So melatonin supplementation can be helpful for many of us. Turns out that melatonin does more than just promote sleep. It has anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. It has mild antidepressant and anti-anxiety effects, and it may protect our mitochondria. And the mitochondria are the little energy factories in all our cells, but especially in our brain cells. And we need our mitochondria to produce that 20% energy consumption that our brains need to function well. There's a fair amount of evidence that one of the things that happens with aging is that aging may represent a failure of mitochondrial energy production in the brain. So anything we can do to protect our mitochondrial and ensure them up as we get older is a good thing. So melatonin supplementation may be a safe and effective way to do that. Now let's turn to stress management and brain health, the third pillar of our lifestyle approach. Now, the bottom line here, when we think about stress, is there's good stress and bad stress. So the bottom line is that just like exercise is a form of good stress, our brains need some good stress. And trying to eliminate stress from your life is not a healthy thing to do in terms of brain health. Acute stress or good stress, time-limited pulse stress that comes up in response to an engaging activity that's demanding, that's challenging, that pushes you a bit out of your comfort zone, promotes brain health. In fact, it's necessary for neuroplasticity. And probably because this kind of stress triggers release of Bdnf in the brain. Again, promoting sprouting of cells in the hippocampus and robust turnover of brain cell connections throughout the brain. It's the chronic stress that's the bad stress. It's the stress that's with you day in and day out, week after week, month after month, year after year. What I've just described basically is the American lifestyle these days, particularly in the era of COVID. This kind of stress is really destructive. It triggers a massive inflammatory reaction in the brain, leading to huge amounts of oxidative damage that takes a toll on the brain. But even outside the brain, chronic stress dysregulates heart activity, which you can appreciate can indirectly affect brain circulation. And it stimulates chronic elevation of stress hormones, including cortisol, which again, you need little pulses of cortisol actually help the brain. But when cortisol is elevated in a prolonged, constant way, it's really destructive to the brain. People that take prednisone know it's bad for their bone mineral density. It's equally bad in the brain. It just does bad things. Chronic stress actually shuts off Bdnf, which is why dealing with chronic stress is so critical. Now, how can we do that? There's no best right way to deal with chronic stress. Everybody can figure out the best way to do it for themselves. But I want to talk about meditation, Tai Chi, and yoga, because these are three practices that have been subject to rigorous amounts of scientific research and for which there's a tremendous amount of data supporting the brain health benefits. We'll start with Tai Chi, which does a number of things that are beneficial, but has been shown in a number of studies to bring about in regular practitioners increases in gray matter and increased gray matter or cortical thickness in the brain. In addition to that, practicing Tai Chi is associated with improvements in balance and a 50% reduction in falls. We keep in mind that a third of people over the age of 65 who live in the community, people like us, fall every year. Reducing the rate of falls is a huge benefit. And Tai Chi has been shown to be an effective treatment for depression, at least at the milder stages. And we do recommend Tai Chi as part of our treatment plans for our patients with depression. Similarly, yoga is beneficial for depression, probably because it reduces inflammation in the brain, which some evidence is starting to show may be actually a major factor that causes depression later in life. Yoga has been shown to be associated with a reduction in inflammatory mediators throughout the body, with a reduction in oxidative burden, and also improved brain cell density, gray matter thickness, and the like, and enhanced white matter connectivity. But I'm going to spend the majority of my time as we come to a conclusion talking about meditation, because we know the most about the neuroscience of meditation. It's easy to understand why. People can meditate while their heads are in a CAT scanner, an MRI scanner, or a PET scanner, or a DTI scanner, where it's harder to do that while you're doing yoga or Tai Chi. So we have a lot of data about the brain health benefits of meditation. And to summarize, I'll simply tell you that meditation is good for the brain. It improves brain gray matter thickness and cortical thickness. It reduces inflammation and oxidative stress. It improves memory and other cognitive abilities. It improves immune function and the like. But it also produces a number of psychological and emotional benefits that, taken together, really have to do with wellness and resilience and adaptation to stress in old age. That together, in addition to improving coping and stress adaptation and resilience, meditation is associated with improved self-esteem and better outlook on life, particularly in later life, reductions in level of anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. And together, all of these things can be lumped into a concept that is emerging in the gerontology literature known as successful aging. So I'm going to finish up by talking a little bit about the difference between healthy aging and successful aging. And in doing that, I'm going to wax philosophical for a minute. So going back to the times of the Greeks, the classic philosophers really posed the question, what constitutes a good life and what's the best way for us to live it? And you know about the Stoics and the Epicureans, and they all had their ideas about such things. But along came Aristotle with a unique perspective. Aristotle thought happiness alone is not sufficient to have a good life or live a good life. And he suggested a concept called eudaimonia, which is hard to translate into English, but is best thought of as a form of human flourishing. And what Aristotle said is that human flourishing involves not just being happy and satisfied, but it involves having a meaningful purpose that one pursues passionately, that one engages with, that commands one's attention, that's a bit demanding and feels worthwhile to do. It's pursuing a virtuous life. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this is that aging researchers have begun to look at this concept of eudaimonia and have begun to research it as a variable that may affect outcome later in life. They started to look at people that lead purposeful, meaningful, passionate lives, engaged in some kind of activity that demands something of them, that stresses them out a little bit, compared to people that don't pursue that. And what they found is people that do that lead a eudaimonic life, are actually mentally much better off in old age. So what I'm going to tell you, and I regret that we're not face-to-face in person having this talk, because I'd much rather be in the room talking to you all in person, but this is the part of the talk where I'm glad we're doing this at Zoom, because what I'm going to tell you now might bring out the rotten tomatoes hurled my way, because the bottom line is that a lot of data is now showing that retirement is not so good for you. That if you retire, you need to find something to replace it that's as demanding, as challenging, as engaging as your former profession was. You don't have to keep doing, you don't have to work forever, but you have to find something that engages you purposefully in a meaningful way and pushes you out of your comfort zone a little bit. Now, I'm going to show you 3 examples of successful aging. Now, this guy we all recognize right now, current national hero. I'm happy that a physician is a national hero these days, at least to most Americans. Here we have Dr. Fauci during the height of the AIDS epidemic, the forefront of it, making a difference. And here we have him giving a press conference during the COVID pandemic, still in the game, still at the peak of his game. Now, this is a picture of healthy aging. This is a guy whose health is still good. He still runs, he's still vigorous, he works out, and he's still sharp as can be. And he's at the top of his game. He's a national hero. At the age of 79, I would, by the way, so somebody who's never retired, he stayed actively engaged in the game, and he's still at it. Signed up to join the Biden administration, so he's not going away anytime soon. Now, here's another example. All right, someone we all know well enough. Clint Eastwood At age 41, during the heyday of the Dirty Harry movies, and more recently at age 89, when he starred and won an Oscar for his performance in The Mule. Now, I don't know anything about Clint Eastwood's health currently, but let's assume that he's pretty healthy. But you look at the picture of this guy, and you look at the picture of this guy, and there's no doubt that aging has taken a bit of a toll. He's still a pretty good looking guy for an 89-year-old, but compared to this guy doesn't have it anymore. But this guy was at best a B-level actor, typecast B-level actor. And this guy is widely respected worldwide in the industry for not only his acting ability, but his screenwriting ability and his directorial ability. He's respected for his creative abilities and is now at the age of 89 at the top of his game, where this guy wasn't anywhere close to being able to say that, other than spouting a few classic lines we all remember. So this is an example probably of healthy aging, although not quite the picture this guy is, but certainly a picture of successful aging. And now in contrast, we have another familiar life history, that of the notorious RBG, who died just a few months ago. Now, the point here is that RBG endured 3 bouts of cancer and crippling musculoskeletal problems. I mean, while she was still sitting on the bench, she could barely stand up straight. Hardly a picture of healthy aging, but certainly one of healthy brain aging. She hadn't lost a step. That at her age, even in her physical condition, even living with chronic pain, she still held her weight with the other justices, could still write legal briefs and opinions for the court that hadn't lost a step compared to the other 8 justices. And this is an example, not so much of healthy aging, but certainly successful aging. The bottom line being that keeping your brain going, as long as you keep your brain going, the brain can improve and make gains throughout life. And as long as those gains outpace the physical losses, we're still ahead of the game, and we could say that we've aged successfully. So with that, I'm going to close. I put this picture up here only because I love it. Don't try this at home. I figure I've got 20 years to train up to the point where I can do this too. So there's a goal that's going to engage me in a challenging way. But I'm going to stop now, and hopefully I've left some time for some questions. So thank you for your attention, and I'm going to take my slides down, and I'll be happy to open it up to questions, assuming we still have time for that.
That was great. Thank you so much, Gary. Everybody's applauding. We can't hear you, but we know what's happening. So we do have a few minutes for questions, and I know that there's lots of conversation to be had. So a couple things. I can try and see most of you, and I will do my best to acknowledge and get to people's questions. You can also use the chat bar, and I'll try and catch that for folks. So I'm going to try and view you in the gallery, and I think I actually can't see everybody on one screen, but I will do my best. Oh, I saw Dan there. So Dan, go ahead and unmute yourself. We'll see whose eye I catch. It'll be a little exercise. Oh.
Well, Dan's trying to mute it, so I actually see my dad asking a question. So I'm going to take the liberty as a speaker of recognizing him. So go for it, Dad.
Okay. What is the optimum amount of melatonin to take on a daily basis for sleep purposes?
Good question. Don't know the answer to that. So at this point, we prescribe it for sleep. And we usually start with 3 milligrams, although for some people, even that's too high. So you can split those pills in half, or you can find 1 milligram pills. But usually finding the dose that works for you, anywhere from 3 milligrams up to 10 milligrams at bedtime or more. And for some people, taking a long-acting form that you take actually not at bedtime, but at sundown, because that's when our brains normally release melatonin. Is at dusk, when the sun goes down. That triggers through our eyes the release of melatonin. So it may work better to take it, for some people it'll work best taken at bedtime, for others it'll work best taken at dusk, early in the evening. but anywhere from 3 milligrams a day or less to as much as 9 to 10. And I have a few patients that even take more than that. I don't prescribe it, but they come in and tell me they're doing it. It's working great, so I don't argue with them. Okay, Dan, did you get unmuted?
Can you hear me, Gary?
I can.
Oh, that was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Would golf be a safe alternative to Tai Chi and ballroom dancing?
I think so. If you do it standing on one foot, Dan,
I mean, Aristotle sounded like he might be a golfer, something
it
straight.
might be. I mean, I think if you follow the logic that 20 minutes of walking 3 times a week produces measurable brain benefits, anything that you can do to get you out there. I mean, golf is nice to get you. If you walk the course, you're certainly doing more walking than that right off the bat. It involves hand-eye coordination. It involves planning and execution. I mean, it's a good example of multitasking.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. That was good.
And I just saw David and then Margaret. So if David, if you guys can, there you go. Go ahead.
I think.
Can you, Gary, can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, okay. Alternatively to a good sound night's sleep, are there any brain health benefits of taking a nap mid-afternoon?
So that's interesting. So there actually are, although the problem is the benefits are mostly seen in people already experiencing significant levels of cognitive decline or suffering from dementia. The area of napping, the jury's out on that. We think it's probably harmless to take a short nap in the afternoon. The trick is some people, if they nap during the day or nap too much, it may throw off the nocturnal sleep. One of the problems with aging is that the ability of our brains to consolidate sleep to the night time. You know, if you think about infants sleep on and off throughout the day, and then as the brain develops, it learns to be able to stay awake during the day and sleep at night. And with aging and drop-offs of melatonin level, that synchronization may deteriorate. And taking a nap during the day can actually hasten it. So the trick is figuring it out empirically. You know, you can try napping. I don't think there's any harm to it. And there may be some benefits, but take it on a case-by-case basis to see what happens. I think that if you find that you're sleeping okay at night and feel rested and sharp during the day, napping is probably doing you some good. On the other hand, if you're finding that you're awake at night and during the day you feel kind of mentally sluggish, you may want to actually think about sleep restriction and use of melatonin as a way to get more efficient sleep during the night.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
And then Margaret, and then it looks like Gary, your folks have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. Gary,
Thanks, Margaret.
resveratrol is available in a supplement. I know we didn't talk about supplements tonight, but if you're not somebody who is fond of red wine, anything wrong with taking resveratrol, and how much should you take?
So that's a great question, Margaret. And the reason it's a difficult question is we don't know the answer to that. So one of the problems is we really don't know how much resveratrol you need to take in a supplemented form. And the problem and we don't really know how much is actually safe to take. We think it's safe. And by the way, peanuts are also loaded with resveratrol, another good source. Resveratrol may actually, the bioavailability or potency of resveratrol may also depend on how it's harvested and prepared. So there's some evidence that products on the market some of them may be of value, others may be worthless, and there's just no way to really know. There's no way to know how to tell. As far, I mean, from my point of view, as far as I can tell, there's probably no harm in it, as long as you don't overdo it. And as long as you recognize with taking all supplements, any supplements, they're not FDA regulated. So you really don't know what you're getting. And there have been some really bad problems in the past of lots of people getting really sick and many people dying years ago with various supplements. So there's always a bit of a roll of the dice. best answer I could give you at this point.
Okay, thanks.
And I know I saw the Wolves and your folks, Gary, let's see. See whoever we have unmuted.
Gary, may I speak, Leah?
Yeah.
Thank you. Gary, thank you so much for the updated, encouraging news about the hippocampus and regeneration of the brain. That's so great. Thank you for that. It's encouraging. But you did not speak about pharmacological interventions as it relates to Alzheimer's disease. And I wondered, do you feel that those products that are sold by pharmacies can be beneficial?
Good question. Thanks for asking it, Jackie. The problem with that, I didn't talk about that because if you get me started, we'll be here till midnight on that subject. The short answer is none of those drugs are blockbuster drugs. But if you understand what the goals of using them are and they're used by specialists who know what they're doing, they can make a very big difference for people. So in our clinic, we're very aggressive about treating people early and maximally with, there are two families of drugs, medications, FDA approved for treatment of Alzheimer's disease. And these drugs may actually have some benefits for other types of dementias as well. And they do offer a benefit. More importantly, there are other drugs that are used for other conditions that are detrimental to brain health. So a big part of what we do is we look at people's overall health and the entire list of drugs they take, and we try to get them off of drugs that are harmful to the brain, or at least replace those drugs with other more brain-sparing alternatives. But the bottom line is, yes, these drugs they're unappreciated. Part of it is because the way the research is set up to do these studies doesn't really it's not designed to really showcase the true benefits of these drugs. And if you work with enough people over a long enough period of time, family members tell you these drugs can really make a difference. Not all the time, but enough of the time to make it worth using them.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you.
I think my mom had a question.
Yeah, I'm confused about caffeine. Whereas caffeine may be good for you, it also harms your ability to sleep at night. So how do you regulate whether you should take caffeine or you shouldn't take caffeine?
Yeah, that's a good question. So everything there are no perfect drugs, including natural drugs that we find in nature. And everything has benefits, and most of them have some side effects. I think the secret is using caffeine earlier in the day. When I was in medical school, and Cheryl will tell you, when I was in medical school, staying up late, I would drink a strong cup of coffee at 11 o'clock at night to study and be sound asleep a half hour later, passed out right in my textbook. And now if I drink coffee after 3, I'm going to be up all night. So aging definitely has an interaction with that. If caffeine keeps you awake, even at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning, if it has an effect that keeps you awake the rest of the night, caffeine's not your guy, not your solution.
Okay, and I just want to make a note of the timing if anyone needs to duck out. We understand Gary has generously offered a few extra minutes past the time, so we're glad to take questions. And it looks like, so you're already ready with your hand raised there. I don't
That's
know your
Dave,
name.
my brother-in-law.
Yes.
Go for it, Dave.
First of all, Gary, thank you for a terrific presentation. It was fascinating. And I'm wondering did you record this? Is there a way of getting a replay of it? That's not the question. But,
Yes, I can tell you that at the end. Yeah.
Great. That was great. So I'm wondering about the trade-off of what we eat versus supplements. And, there's some foods I imagine that if you can get the proper nutrition from them, you want to do that. There's others that maybe there's not enough concentration. The resveratrol came up, for example. Is phosphodine enough, or should I think about other things to get the same pathways, or some of the other supplements we talked about, the fish oil or just the thought about eating naturally versus supplements?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a tough one to answer. And the reason it's tough to answer is, as you can imagine, Food science research as it applies to population health is a messy, messy area. And it's why, again, every month what you read in the paper changes. This month it's good for you, next month it'll kill you, the next month it'll cure cancer and Alzheimer's, and then a month later again it'll kill you or give you cancer. It's really hard for people to do this research. Our whole funding mechanism to do research is short term. So people, you need to, these are practices that need to be pursued over years and years and years to produce the benefits that we're looking for. And you can't take a group of people and just see what they do for 6 months or even 12 months and expect to see a signal. So the problem with all this data is it's really noisy. The signal to noise ratio is hard to discern. So I think that the trend is to suggest that getting nutrients from natural food sources is more effective than getting it from supplements, but I'm not entirely convinced I believe that. The vitamin D story is an interesting one. So most of us can't really get enough vitamin D from either sunlight or dairy products, and dairy products, as I already told you, aren't that good for you anyway. So our government recommends vitamin D supplementation for anybody over the age of 60, and they probably don't recommend a high enough level. But the data are pretty strong that vitamin D supplementation has huge benefits, not just for bone health, but for heart health, immune functioning, and brain functioning. Our brains need vitamin D. And taking vitamin D supplementation is definitely something I do recommend, because very few of us really get enough. You go to your doctor and get a level, and they'll tell you the level, if your level's 28 or 29, they'll tell you you're good enough because they think 20 to 30 is the therapeutic range. But more robust levels are probably desirable. At least 30 and maybe closer to 40 is probably a good target to shoot for. And there's an example where I think the data suggests that supplementation is effective.
That's very helpful. Thank you. For what it's worth.
There are other supplements, for example, the curcumin story. These days you go to Starbucks and you get turmeric in your latte. That's probably a complete waste. Doesn't do us any good because there's not anywhere nearly enough turmeric to make a difference. And the issue with turmeric, the magic ingredient in turmeric is a polyphenol called curcumin, which is a wonder drug. It's wonderful stuff. But the effectiveness of curcumin depends on how it's isolated from the turmeric root. And if you can either isolate it in a way where the turmeric is highly effective, or you can isolate it in a way where the curcumin isolated is completely useless and worthless and ineffective. So the question is, from a consumer point of view, how do you know when you go to the GNC or other health food store or the vitamin aisle, look at supplements, what to buy and what not to buy? It's really tough. So that to the extent you can get it from food, after all, that's how our bodies are evolved to digest nutrients. From foodstuffs, that's the best way. But I don't poo-poo supplementation. I think it's a useful thing to do. It's just a caveat emptor situation.
Thanks. Well, thank you. Oh, I get to call on my mother. Let's see.
Yeah.
Mom, can you unmute yourself? And we are maybe.
Gary, thank you very much. This was a wonderful, quick tour. And since we're talking about food, then, for years now, organic has been what is, called upon as important. And lately, I haven't been going to my market, to my co-op, because it's so far away and it's COVID time. And anyway, so our local market is a very nice market, but it doesn't have everything organic, like cabbage. And I've noticed that the cabbage that was not organic is much more flavorful than the cabbage that is organic. And, so I got to thinking, well, of course, it would be better to grow it just from the dirt and organic to consider as far as nutrition.
The $64,000 question, isn't it? So I'll tell you, I mean, my own gut level feeling is if you can eat organic, so much the better. I mean, it's hard. I mean, not with all due respect to Monsanto making foods that grow faster and maybe even taste better. It's hard to imagine that organic isn't healthier. I will tell you that there was an interesting study came out in a nutrition science journal maybe 2-3 years ago that looked at this question. They looked at a large swath of people, 50,000 people that religiously ate organic only, and 50,000 people that ate whatever was on the shelves in the supermarket, and they found no difference in any measure of health outcome. So the researchers ended up saying, organic, it's nice, it's expensive, go for it if you can afford it, but probably isn't doing you any real good. I'm not sure I believe that. You have to be really skeptical about all food nutrition research as it applies to health.
Well, our human system is such a mystery in the sense that how does it actually digest, use? I mean, there's also that part of it is our bodies, how our bodies digest and, right?
Yeah, so I guess what I would leave people with a closing comment is with respect to all of this, exercise, wellness practices, diet and nutrition, is apply a healthy skepticism. The research is murky, the signals change directions all the time. So you want to try to find where there's the most robust signal amongst all the noise, and just approach it with a healthy skepticism before making decisions about taking mega doses of any kind of supplement. Or, as I said, with exercise, make sure that any regimen you adopt is going to be something that's going to be safe for you to do from a medical, mechanical, and physiologic point of view. And just begin moving in the right direction, and the benefits will be there. All right. Thanks again for your attention, everybody, and great questions.
And thank you so much. And for those of you who are wondering, you can view this recorded session from the Ray Center's website. If you go to adult programming, speaker series, and previously recorded, it will be there. It's also, should be a button on the homepage as well. So thank you so much for your time, Gary, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Gary.
There we go. All right. We're taking a 2-week break from our speaker series and we will begin back up again in January with Eric Amaro from the Recreation Department. He's going to talk a little bit about some winter activities to get you out there. All right. Thank you all again. Have a good holiday.
Thank you.
Bye.